Hello, welcome to the channel. So this is a continuation of the previous video where where we saw how to create a GKE private cluster. So basically, without having a public endpoint for the control plane access. So we have both the clusters, the console cluster and the CLI cluster, which we created from the previous video. So in this video, I will show you how to connect to the cluster, private cluster, uh, using a Bastion or jump host, that we call, and using Google Cloud's IAP feature. So IAP is nothing but identity aware proxy. So you can read more about it in Google documentation. It's nothing but it's a similar to a proxy service which allows you to access uh, Google Cloud resources, like for example, SSH to a compute instance, or access any of the IAP authentication supported applications. So you can use IAP service. So you will be able to provision uh, IAM permissions to the users or principals, um, and then based on the access provision, the user service principal can access the application or a service. So if you like to read more about it, you can go to the documentation page and then go through it in detail. So for our use case, we are going to connect to a compute engine instance uh, using IAP, and then we create SSH tunnel, and then we using that tunnel we access the GKE private cluster control plane. So how IAP works? This is just a uh, overview diagram. Like when the user initiates the request, it's a HTTP request. It goes to the load balancer service, which is in front part of the IAP service, and then based on the credentials you pass in, you get authenticated, and based on the IAM roles and permissions, you get authorized, uh, and then pass the firewall. You connect to the uh, GCE. That's how we are going to do it. We are gonna create a uh, compute engine instance, and then using that, we are gonna create an SSH tunnel to GKE private clusters control plane, and then we're gonna uh, execute our kubectl commands against the control plane. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna first create a compute instance. I'm gonna name this as Bastion host. Zone can be any, it's not a problem. Make sure that you choose the region same as the region that the cluster is in. So our clusters are in US Central 1. I'm gonna choose US Central 1. Zone, I'm not gonna have any preference. So you choose OS and storage. Under networking, I'm gonna add a tag ssh-iap-allow. This is a network tag which will uh, create a firewall uh, pointing to. So this is it. So and then uh, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna choose not to have a external IPv4 address allocated to this VM instance. So basically, everything will be private and will connect to the uh, control plane. Even the Bastion host will only have a private IP address because we are going to access it using the IAP method. So rest all, you don't have to choose anything. You leave the default options and then click on create. So as the compute instance is getting created, let's go to VPC network, go to firewall, and then let's create a firewall rule as well. So this firewall rule is to allow uh, access to the compute instance via IAP service. So I'm gonna put the same name as the network tag that we added for the Bastion host. I'm not gonna change anything here. I'm just gonna for the targets I'm gonna set it by default, which is the specified target tags, and I'm gonna put this one, which is the tag we added in the Bastion host as well as and other network tags. And then for the source IPv4 ranges, there is a uh, defined CIDR range that Google uses that's provided in their documentation. So this is the /20 range that Google uses for their IAP services. So I'm gonna put this as the source IPv4 range, and I'm gonna specify the protocol and the port numbers. So the protocol is TCP and port number is 22, which is the SSH port. So I'm gonna create this firewall rule. So all right. So the Bastion host is also created in the meantime. And the firewall rule is also successfully created, which is here. So now back here, we are gonna start the cloud till from wherein we'll run the Gcloud commands that will be used to connect to the uh, GKE cluster control plane. So Gcloud config list just to confirm which account is used and which project is used. So we are good. So there are a couple of things you have to do here. So first you need to get the clusters kubeconfig details. So to get that, you have to run this command. Gcloud container cluster grade credentials, the cluster name. First we'll connect to the console cluster and then the zone where the cluster is created, which is central 1C. So I'm gonna run this. So we have the kubeconfig uh, obtained from the GKE cluster. I'm gonna display it. Right. So this is the console cluster kubeconfig. This is CLI cluster from my previous thing. So let's take that. So this is the kubeconfig for the console cluster. So what we are going, and that is already set as the current context. So what are we going to do now? I'm going to make some couple of edits to the kubeconfig file. So you see here, this is the console cluster data. So I'm gonna remove the certificate authority data and the server information because we are going to connect to the server via the tunnel. So these two new values will be adding. So just a second, let me make sure the indentation is correct. Yeah. So now what are these two values? Right. So previously, if you directly connect to the GKE cluster, it will be using the certificate authority data to authenticate, to securely talk to the cluster's control uh, plane. So now we are going to connect to the cluster via SSH tunneling, which will create, uh, which will be accessible via our local port. So what we have to do is we have to avoid using a certificate to uh, talk with the control plane because we are not directly hitting the control plane endpoint. So we are setting this parameter insecure script TLS verify to proof. So this will be an insecure connection, but still as we will only be able to uh, do this after you authenticate uh, via IAP to the Bastion host. It is still a secure way of doing it. So um, the server information is nothing but https colon double slash localhost IP address and then the port number which will the local host port number which we'll use when we do the SSH tunneling. So I'm gonna save this out here, and then you will have to create the SSH tunnel, right? So for that, this is the command. So Gcloud compute SSH. We enter the uh, compute instance host name, Bastion host, and the option tunnel through IAP. This is the option that will allow you to connect to the Bastion host via IAP, uh, and the zone where the Bastion host is created. It is Central 1A, and then this is the SSH flag to create SSH tunnel connection. So this is the local -L local option, and the port number is this 8888. And now what you have to do is you have to put in the uh, GKE clusters control plane endpoint, which is this IP address. So I'm gonna paste it here, and then 443 is the HTTPS port, which is where the GKE control plane is exposed to the internal network. I'm gonna hit enter. So this will create the SSH tunnel and return back to the local terminal, the Cloud Shell terminal. And then one more step, what you have to do is you have to export HTTPS proxy environment variable, which will be set to uh, the local host colon the port on which you created the SSH tunnel, the local ports, which is www. So I'm gonna hit enter here. So that's pretty much done. So now what you're gonna do is kubectl get ns, get the namespaces to. This is a basic check to see if you are able to query the details from the GKE cluster. So yeah. So if here you have, here you go. So you have this information. This is coming up from this endpoint. Right. So now we saw how to connect to the console cluster. And in a similar way, you can also connect to CLI cluster as well. So the steps more or less is going to be the same. Uh, so I'm gonna unset this HTTPS proxy option because it interferes with the Gcloud command when you execute it. So I'm gonna get the cluster credentials for the CLI cluster now. So CLI cluster, it is created in Central 1J. So get context. So yeah, this is the new and updated CLI cluster kube config, and it is already set as the current context. So we are gonna uh, open the kubeconfig file, edit this information, what we edited. We removed the certificate authority data and updated the server URL. We are gonna set it as similar to the console cluster. So I'm just gonna, sorry, paste this and uh, use a different port number. We can't use the same local port to uh, tunnel for both both endpoints, right? So I'm gonna change the host number, sorry, port number, and then you're going to execute the same command. So sorry, compute SSH. So the same command, Gcloud compute SSH Bastion host tunnel through IAP, the compute instance zone, and then you have to update the local host port number, and then the IP address for the CLI control plane endpoint. So which will be 49. Sorry. So this 10.128.0.49, and then the port number is 443. I'm gonna run this. Yeah, the tunnel should be created. I'm gonna again export the HTTPS proxy environment variable, setting it to localhost colon 8889 port, which is where the CLI tunneling is done. So I'm gonna export this. Now run kubectl to get NS. Yeah. So this is from the CLI cluster. So uh, there are additional namespaces, like you can see as a differentiation between the two clusters. Uh, so yeah, that's pretty much how you can connect to a GKE private cluster using a Bastion host via IAP, using IAP and SSH tunneling method. So the steps for this are available here. So like how to get the cluster credentials, and then how to create the SSH tunneling, and then specifying the proxy details, and then running the kubectl. All the command line steps are available in this link. I'll put it in the video description for your uh, accessibility. So yes, that's pretty much uh, how to create a GKE private cluster and connect securely to the private cluster. There are other methods like you can configure a VPN, and then by connecting to the VPN, you can also access the uh, private cluster control plane endpoints, or you can directly SSH to the dump host. Uh, you can use the console as well. So if you click here, you can directly open an SSH session to the Bastion host, and uh, once you are inside here, so you will have to authenticate and authorize this again. So you are here, you are within this Bastion host. So here you have to install Gcloud and kubectl, get the GKE cluster kube config details as we did from the Cloud Shell, and then you can you don't have to do that SSH tunneling and stuff, and then you can directly run the kubectl commands against the GKE cluster, private GKE clusters control plane endpoint. So this is another method. So yeah, so there are couple of these are the couple of methods that you can access the private GKE private cluster securely. Right. So this will uh, complete this video. Um, Thanks for your time.